Hi, my name is Anita Moore and I'm a decorative artist, and today I'm going to teach you step by step on how to do this Monarch gift tag. It's made with mixed media and different techniques, so let's get started. Okay, so I have my 5-inch postal gift tag and I've already sanded it with a fine sanding paper. And the first thing that we're going to be putting on here is decoupage so that I can put my little article paper that I've already cut out. And today we are going to be using Deco Art Media Fluid acrylic, and I'm also going to be using Deco black gold brushes by Dynasty. And these here are Palmer brushes. You can have a filbert or a flat. They're 1 inch and they are great for applying any medium to your surface. So first off, I'm going to put Deco Decoupage matte, and I'm going to use this filbert Palmer brush. I'm going to apply a nice even layer. And I have paper towel underneath just to protect my my table. So now that I have a nice even coat, I'm gonna put my newspaper article, and I'm gonna try and put it as straight as possible. And what I'm gonna do is flatten it out with my fingers. And it's okay if you have ridges. When it dries, it'll give a texture in the background. So once you've found that it's well placed and laid flat, I'm going to apply another coat of decoupage on top of the article. Now, for this step here, you can apply X strokes. It'll give extra texture in the background. Okay, so once I've applied my layer, I'm going to dry this and I'll be back. Okay, so I've dried my surface, and before I move on to this, I have my watercolor paper, which is 120 pound. You can use whatever watercolor paper that you have on hand. But the first thing I want to do is apply a coat of decoupage onto my surface and put it aside and let it dry. So I'm going to apply an even coat. It doesn't have to be too thick. Okay, I'm just going to do enough so that I can make a couple butterflies on here. Okay, I'm going to put this aside and let this dry. We're going to move on to the surface, and I have my sanding paper. So what I want to do is you're going to rub onto the sides till your paper cuts. You go all the way around. A little piece right here. There. Now we have our surface all done. I'm going to just wipe my dust off. Okay, so now we're going to use cobalt teal hue, and we're going to apply a wash over this. But I think I missed a step here. The first thing I do want to do is apply gesso to the background. So this will allow me to hide some of the writing in the center area. So I have my media gesso, and I also have a palette knife. So I'm just going to pick some up. And what you want to do is just apply in layers so that it gives you that little texture on the background. You can apply on to the edges as well. Okay, and I like it just the way this is. And I'm going to dry this, and I will be right back. Okay, I've dried the gesso and it's cooled off. So now we're going to base coat this with cobalt teal hue, and it's like a wash. So I have a drop here. I'm going to water down my oval wash brush and just blend it with water. And I'm going to apply in the X motion. And we can always add a couple coats of this. Just keep applying. Okay, I'm going to take a piece of paper towel, and I have a water bottle, and I just want to spray the center area a little bit more. And I'm going to take my paper towel, roll it into a ball. I'm just going to dab a little bit in the center. This will allow for the white gesso to pop out a little bit. Okay, while this dries, let's go back to the watercolor paper, and we're going to apply the vermilion for my butterfly. Okay, so the gesso is decoupage is dry. So I'm going to just use a flat wash for this part. So I don't want it too watered down. So I'm going to apply in the X motion. This will allow different little color into my butterfly when I stamp it. Okay, I'm going to put this aside and let it dry. Okay, it's going to take a little longer to dry, so I'm going to be right back. Okay, so it's dry. I have my angle brush, and I'm going to float all along the edge with the same blue. And I put a new dab of paint on my palette. This doesn't have to be a perfect float. I load my brush every time for each side. Okay, and now you have your floats. And I'm going to trace my pattern on transfer paper. And I'm going to base coat and I'll be right back. Okay, so I went ahead and I base coated my petals with Titan Buff and the center of my flower with raw sienna. And before we move on to my tag, I want to stamp our butterflies onto our color water paper. And the stamp that I'm using today is from Stupendous, and it's got a variety of butterflies. You can use whatever butterfly you want. I'm using the little Monarch right here, and I have it on a clear block for stamping. And I want to show you two types of ink that you can use, or whatever watercolor ink that you have on hand. I use the Stays On, and I've also tried with the Memento one. The only difference is this took a little longer to dry, so I did use this one and I let it completely dry overnight. This one here dries okay, but it's not as dark as the Memento. So I just want to show you the difference between the two of them. So I have my stamp here, and I'm going to just apply a layer of ink. Okay. I'm going to apply pressure. Okay, and now I'm going to show you the difference with Memento. Okay. So I did go on a little darker, but like I said, it takes really long time to dry. I did some ahead of time, and it's ready to go. So what, like, they're dry, and what I do want to do on is use my little scissors, and I'm going to cut one out, and I just go along the edges. Oops. Go ahead and cut off the antenna. We're going to add some paint ourselves to do the antennas. Okay, I'm just going to go right around. If anyone is interested in this pattern, I have it on my website as a PDF file. It's totally free. Go ahead and download it. I'll have a link to my website and any supplies that I have used today along with the video. So I'm going to put this aside, and I'm going to take my tag back. So now we're going to apply these cute little floats here, and they're done choppy. So I'm using the Pyrrole Red with an angle brush, a small angle brush. And this is done choppy, and I'm going to show you on a piece of paper what I mean by choppy. Okay, so I load my brush. So what I do mean is just chop away. So it's kind of messy. Okay, so let's start with this one right here. And all I'm doing is the end of the petal. I drag it to the bottom. I want my paint to be just a little bit more watery. can also use a mop brush if you find it's too wet. Okay, now when you get to these ones, you don't see the end of the petal, so what we just do is a light little float of color to these ones. Okay, so now I'm going to let that dry, and we're going to highlight and shade the center of the flower. And what I do is for the highlight, I'm going to apply a mix of raw sienna and Titan buff. So I'm going to load with raw sienna, if you can see, and I'm going to pick up some Titan buff and just mix those two colors together. Okay, and I'm just going to float along the top right here. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry. And this one here, the bottom of the petals is kind of just like a little wash of color. So what I did do is I wet the petals, and I picked up some raw sienna. And what I'm going to do is just dab some of the colors. From bottom going to the center of the petal, all the way around. Okay, and when that dries, then we're going to add a darker color to this. So at the bottom of the petal, I floated with burnt umber. And you don't need a whole lot of paint on your palette. Like, you just need a little bit of this paint. So let's float the bottom. Okay, I'm going to let that dry. Okay, while that dries, we're going to trace around in the petals with metallic gold. And I use a rigger liner, and it's a number 0. Okay, I do use it wet. And what I did, you can apply this thick, thin, that's totally up to you. So I just load my brush. And what I did is I started from the center and I just traced all around my petal. Again, you can add it thick or very thin. What I like about this paint, it dries really fast. Okay. So now I can add another little float on my bottom petals. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to water down my paint a little bit instead of wetting my petals. I just want a little bit more water. I'm just going to dab. I want a solid little color. So if you find too dark, just add a little bit more water to your brush. Okay, that'll dry. So the next step that I did do is I took my Americana Snow Titanium White, and we're gonna dab some white on the center using my stylus. So I did metallic dots all around, and I added a few white. So using my stylus, just add in different little sections. And if you want bigger little dots, you can also use your rigger liner and just dab with, add lots of paint at the end. Okay, and now I'm going to add just a few more little white dots here. Okay, now we're going to let that dry, and I'm going to go back to my little butterfly here. And my butterfly has white patches or dots, so I did use my rigger for this. Okay, and over here I just dabbed some white. And you can add some over here. You kind of already see where the dots should have went. Definitely add more. And over here, there's not as much as the top area. I'm just going to turn this. Okay, and there's a little bit on the body too, if you want to add just a few little dots. Okay, so we're going to let that one dry. Okay, I'll just move this. Okay, we need to add our hole of the tag. So what I do is I take my stylus, I find the little hole, and what I'm going to do is keep pushing the paper all the way around with the stylus. Okay, I have here a stencil from Studio R12, and they're bubbles. So what I did was I took my gesso, I used my palette knife, and this is still wet, so I'm gonna try not to get a whole lot on it. So I'm gonna just lay this here. Okay, I'm going to pick up some gesso. And starting from the top, I'm just going to drag. Try not to get any on my surface. You can get some on your flower too. So just scrape off all excess gesso. Okay, I'm going to lift this up. And I like cleaning the edges off. So you can either use your palette or your finger. A little bit on here. Okay, and I'm gonna take a clean area that I haven't used, and I'm going to put some over here. I'm gonna pick up a little bit more gesso. And just so it's kind of equal. Again, it doesn't have to be like the holes doesn't have to be fully covered. You just want to add some texture to this. So again, I'm just going to clean this off. Okay, so now we have to let that dry, and we'll be right back. Okay, our butterfly is dry, and what we're going to do is apply gesso to this so that we can glue our butterfly to the surface. So I'm going to pick up my little Palmer brush. I'm going to apply decoupage. I did say gesso, but I meant decoupage to the surface right here. Okay, a little bit on my butterfly. I'm going to place it to where I want it. And I'm going to apply an even coat all over top of my butterfly. Okay, now just holding these pieces down. Keep applying decoupage till it sticks to the surface. Okay, once this dries, we can put on our little antennas to the butterfly. Okay, our final step. I'm going to use Americana Lamp Black in my rigger brush. Okay, so let's water this down. I'm going to apply my little antenna over here. And one this way. Okay, I want to show you the final step to my tag, and here I use a small oval foam brush. What I do is I wet it, and then I take a piece of paper towel and I just squeeze the excess water. So to load your brush, you need to lay it flat and just drag the paint. So you don't want it fully loaded, okay? You don't want blobs on it. You just want to say that you have paint on it. And what this does is you're going to lay your brush flat and just go along the ridges or the edge. And as you can see, I've applied one coat of paint and it doesn't bleed onto the top surface. So I just pick up some more, I just drag my paint, and I make sure that I don't overload. Okay, and there again, you don't have any on your surface, so you let that dry and you give another coat of black. I hope you enjoyed the class.